primary things, both from a sort of data representation as a file, or sort of any of the things that any ways you might want to store data, but also then in communication or via APIs. So we're certainly thinking about and looking for models that allow that to be done cleanly. And then sort of the big picture is the challenges, if you will, is how to not lose interconnectivity between things when you start to sort of distribute information in pieces.
Well, yes, I can add a lot of things. So if we look at this question was related to IFC, and IFC is, to simplify, it's two things. It's the definition of objects and attributes that describe them, and then it's the relations between objects that constitute an assembly, a building, a system, or whatever. So in terms of file-based and non-file-based, there is no, let's say, technical limitations of representing IFC data in, let's say, different sizes, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I think, absolutely. Part of the struggles with IFC is that they're self-standing containers, and it's very difficult to reference external things. Like an architect might define rooms, but then you might need to identify which equipment are in rooms, which might be designed or have an engineer responsible for them. So absolutely, transactions of smaller data sets and referencing external relationships is critical for improving what IFC is capable of.
The biggest point for me is that we see that IFC models get bigger and bigger, right? More data we're pushing into these files. And, our focus right now is we want to take an existing BIM model and then create drawings from them or have some kind of derivative process. And so for us, the model changes over time. We don't want you to recreate your work. And so it's super important that we kind of actually can focus on the content that has changed, right? So yes, now we have to kind of figure this out inside the drawing and maybe point you towards those changes. But obviously, if we can only consume a targeted change set, I think that would definitely enable a lot more interesting workflows. Obviously, performance then becomes also an interesting consideration. So we're definitely looking forward to this evolution.
What STEP does have going for it is it's a very efficient way of serializing data. So I think that's one of the reasons why it's persisting even through other more modern choices like XML and JSON at the moment.
In our case, we want to load that model as quickly as possible and throw something on the screen. And I think there are definitely more optimized formats for that use case, right? But I think that's not IFC's goals necessarily, right? So we do see some efforts for people that are doing viewing-only workflows, creating other intermediate formats so that they can achieve that goal.
Speaking for the Nemetschek group, which is a lot of brands, software that really focus on OpenBIM as the kind of way to communicate between them. I guess in many cases we are not exactly using step files or Express, but we compile that to, let's say, a native IFC, so to speak, that is more efficient, that's more like a database rather than a file. And then we convert back and forth to whatever IFC is de facto standard when it's a file.
I think also, maybe some parts will move away from IFC and this ability of transactions and relating to other data sources. So, for example, serializing mesh or triangulated face sets in IFC is not a good choice. So maybe there'll be more modern ways of expressing geometry that get referenced or linked from the IFC. And like Greg said,
yeah, and just to follow up on that point, if I would, certainly the idea of referencing modern representations like GLTF, let's say, or something like that for mesh representations is something that has been on the table since early discussions, especially with the JSON. To Robert's point, being able to serialize small changes in more modern formats or different, and then to Bjorn's sort of point about sort of binary representations that are quite fast. These are all things that I think are on the table.
Well, the focus should be the shared data, the data that is relevant to share between different stakeholders or applications or whatever, and not necessarily be replaced as replacing the native format in various applications. But having said that, we see a lot of applications that kind of use an IFC as a foundation for the native model. And then they build some various business rules to allow better parametrics than IFC, parametric design than, for instance, IFC does and stuff like that. But it's really almost a one-to-one relation.
What we are certainly trying to make sure is, like Bjorn said, that the shared data representation is robust enough to move in both directions. One of the areas we are looking at, like from a software architecture standpoint, is a little more modularity at the object level. So that means that if someone wanted to have their own business rules attached to those objects, it wouldn't actually affect the larger sort of components of the IFC data that is shared. So there is certainly, I don't know, a realization if we move that route that that kind of using IFC plus some other business logic could be much easier to do in the future, but that's an opportunity, maybe not the first goal.
When we made that switch to having DWG be the native format of our application, it unlocked so many new capabilities, no longer having to worry about import and export, or rather working about how do we represent our concepts natively in that format, right? And so, yes, it is a huge change for any legacy application to switch their native format, but I could definitely imagine future formats, going that route. And specifically, if you look at, we're talking here in the context of the ODA, if the ODA provides robust operations to actually manipulate IFC once it's actually, in memory, then I think I definitely see an opportunity here.
I think part of the problem with this area as well is it's pretty easy to show that some objects you can already achieve like full design transfer, like walls and beams and fairly, standard slabs and floors and things like that. But if you start talking about how to capture the constraints and business logic of a stair or a railing or slightly more sophisticated objects, then it's going to take a lot of effort to try and get consensus. And yeah, so I guess how you limit the scope or identify the scope about full editability will be key to the success of this type of exchange.
I think one of the key areas, and we don't have good names for these yet, so these are my names and ways of thinking about them. So one is assembled data, and this is sort of a slightly harder concept to wrap your head around without some graphics, but the idea that there's a lot of built elements that are actually constructed from different domains information. And I think the other then is realizing that if you have that kind of concept, then there's actually needs for different views of the same objects. So the idea that you could call it a scene level or an assembly level there.
If you look at GIS, for example, even in my smartphone, I can overlay a lot of information from different sources. The point is, it's the same also when you have a lot of stakeholders working with the built environment. You maintain and are responsible for a set of data that can be shared, but it's not necessarily stored in one place. But it should be shareable in a suitable format, and that will probably be IFC.
Model the same thing, so removing some of the duplication and just making it easier for others to adopt and use would be a great thing to target for the next version of the standard.
I think it is interesting to see now with the Open Design Alliance making available IFC tools that are, broadly accessible, right? So we're finally moving away from this, how do we persist this data in this file so we can read and write it? And we hopefully can get also now more, I would say, cohesion in the industry on how we actually push the data into that.
But I think if when it comes to a data modeling perspective, I hope we have a pretty clear view by March, I suppose.